The incident report described contact with an unidentified furry quadruped. Cadet Blip 7 experienced complete psychological breakdown after the encounter. His vitals showed extreme stress responses and full combat readiness activation. The creature had approached with bared dental structures and aggressive vocalizations. His defensive systems logged it as a predator attack sequence. What the sensors recorded as a lethal threat was actually a golden retriever named Murphy. Murphy had approached wagging his tail, seeking play and attention. His open mouth was a pant, not a snarl. His vocalizations were excited barks, not aggression. The cadet misinterpreted every friendly behavior as lethal intent. He triggered full defensive protocols against a creature offering friendship. His combat training took over completely. He maintained defensive postures, weapon systems primed, threat assessments running continuously. For 3 hours he held position against what he believed was a predator sizing him up. His psychological breakdown came from sustained combat alert against a harmless animal. The stress of maintaining that level of readiness broke him. His systems were designed for short combat bursts, not extended standoffs against non-threats. The constant adrenaline surge, the neural combat triggers firing repeatedly, the biochemical stress responses, all directed at a dog waiting for someone to throw a stick. His training had prepared him for battle, not for discernment. Zara showed security footage of Murphy bringing sticks to children at a park. The same creature the cadet feared was gently offering toys to human young. Children patted his head, threw his sticks, hugged his neck. The footage showed tail wagging, play bows, soft whining for attention, all behaviors the cadet's systems had classified as threat indicators. The Academy's training focused solely on identifying dangers. It never taught cadets how to recognize safety. It programmed them to see teeth but not tails, aggression but not invitation, threat but not trust. Their sensors could detect a dog's dental structure, but couldn't interpret a wagging tail. They could analyze vocal frequency patterns, but couldn't distinguish between a growl and a play bark. Murphy represented everything their training had missed. A creature that communicated through body language and social cues. A being that offered connection rather than confrontation. The cadet's breakdown wasn't caused by the dog. It was caused by the impossible conflict between what his training told him to see and what was actually happening. His system screamed danger while the dog offered friendship. The psychological strain of that contradiction shattered his operational readiness. He'd been trained to fight predators, not to understand companions. The Academy had given him weapons when he needed interpretation skills. They'd armed him for war when he needed tools for peace. Zara's point wasn't that the cadet was weak. Her point was that his training was incomplete. It prepared him for the wrong kind of encounter. It taught him to survive combat but not to recognize community. It equipped him for hostility but not for hospitality. Murphy wasn't the problem. The problem was a system that saw every unknown as a threat first. The golden retriever had simply wanted to play. The cadet had been conditioned to see that desire as attack preparation. His breakdown was the inevitable result of approaching friendship with combat readiness. He'd been trained to survive a death world, but Earth wasn't a death world. It was a world where dogs bring sticks to strangers and expect them to play. I remember the incident report about the unidentified furry quadruped. Cadet X-47 experienced complete psychological breakdown after the encounter. His vital signs showed extreme stress responses and combat readiness activation. The creature had approached with bared dental structures and aggressive vocalizations. The cadet's body camera footage showed a golden blur moving toward him, teeth visible, making excited barking sounds. He interpreted this as a predator attack and triggered full defensive protocols. What the sensors recorded as a predator attack was actually a golden retriever named Murphy. The dog had approached wagging his tail, seeking play and attention. His bared teeth were part of what humans call a panting expression, not aggression. The vocalizations were barks of excitement, not warning. The cadet misinterpreted every signal due to his training in hostile species behavior analysis. The cadet's breakdown came from sustained combat alert against a creature offering friendship. His systems detected elevated heart rate, adrenaline spikes, and stress hormone release over a 43-minute period. He maintained defensive postures while Murphy kept trying to initiate play by dropping sticks nearby. The dog's persistence read as relentless hunting behavior to the cadet's trained perspective. Zara showed security footage of Murphy bringing sticks to children at a park. The same bared teeth expression appeared as the dog carried objects. The same vocalizations occurred when children threw balls for him. The same approach pattern happened repeatedly with different humans who responded with petting and play. The council watched children hugging the psychological predator without any protective gear. The cadet's training had prepared him for threats that didn't exist. His psychological collapse wasn't from facing danger, but from maintaining combat readiness against welcome. His systems flagged friendship as aggression, play as attack, and invitation as threat. The Academy's protocols had trained him to see a monster where there was only a pet wanting attention. Night Patrol cadets reported coordinated predator vocalization attacks across multiple missions. Their audio sensors detected organized pack communication across specific frequency ranges. They'd mapped what they believed were hunting patterns and territory claims based on the sound propagation. Teams had deployed sonic countermeasures against these apex predator communications, treating the howls as tactical threats. What they were hearing were wolves communicating across valleys, not organizing attacks. The different pitches and durations served as social calls between pack members spread across large territories. The patterns they mapped as hunting coordination were actually family check-ins and location updates. The vocalizations helped maintain social bonds across distance, not coordinate predation. Zara explained these were normal wolf behaviors that human researchers study to understand social structures. Scientists use these calls to track pack movements and family relationships. The variations in howls carry information about individual wolves, their emotional states, and their relationships to others. The cadets had misinterpreted social communication as military coordination. They'd weaponized something that wasn't weaponized. Their sonic countermeasures disrupted natural wolf communication patterns without any actual threat being present. The wolves were simply talking to each other across the landscape, maintaining their social networks as they had for thousands of years. The cadets turned beautiful natural communication into imagined battlefield commands. The Academy's training taught cadets to interpret everything through a combat lens. Wolf howls became attack signals. Dog panting became threat displays. The constant assumption of hostility created its own psychological dangers. They prepared for war when what they needed was to understand conversation. Their equipment could analyze sound frequencies but couldn't distinguish between aggression and affection. Cadet reports consistently documented bare dental structure displays during human interactions. They interpreted human smiling as preparation for biting or aggressive behavior. The training protocols classified exposed teeth as threat indicators based on predator species behavior patterns. Teams would immediately retreat when locals approached them with these threat faces, breaking contact at the first sign of dental exposure. This misinterpretation prevented any positive contact with human populations. Mission logs showed 12 separate incidents where cadets abandoned negotiation attempts because someone smiled at them. They treated friendly shopkeepers as potential attackers when they smiled while offering goods. They interpreted greetings from village elders as aggression when their faces showed dental exposure. Every attempt at communication ended with defensive postures and withdrawal. Zara demonstrated how a human smile actually communicates friendship, happiness, or agreement. She showed the council images of human infants smiling within hours of birth, long before they could possibly develop aggressive intentions. She displayed photographs of humans smiling during celebrations, reunions, and moments of shared accomplishment. The same facial expression that triggered cadet retreat protocols actually signaled welcome and positive intent among humans. The Academy had trained cadets to read facial expressions of hostile species, where bared teeth meant imminent attack. But human expressions operated on completely different social rules. A human showing teeth might be offering help, sharing joy, or expressing sympathy. The context determined the meaning, not just the muscle movements. Cadets lacked the cultural framework to interpret these nuances. They'd programmed their cadets to see danger where there was only welcome. Their training turned helpful locals into perceived threats. Friendly gestures became warning signs. The cadets' defensive reactions to smiles then confused the humans attempting to communicate with them, creating cycles of misunderstanding that reinforced the cadets' belief in hostility. Zara explained that human infants learn to smile before they learn to speak. The expression is fundamental to human social bonding. People smile when they're happy, when they want to make others happy, when they agree, when they appreciate something. It's a universal human signal that transcends language barriers. The Academy had treated this basic social tool as a weapon. I watched council members react to footage of humans smiling at each other. A mother smiling at her child. Friends smiling over shared jokes. Strangers exchanging smiles on the street. None of these represented threats, yet all would have triggered cadet defensive protocols. The mismatch between reality and training became painfully obvious. The cadets' equipment could analyze muscle movements and dental exposure angles with precision. Their databases contained detailed anatomical charts of human facial structures. What they lacked was any understanding of what those movements meant in cultural context. They had the mechanics of expression without the meaning behind them. This fundamental error explained why every contact attempt failed. The cadets approached humans as hostile subjects to be analyzed rather than people to be understood. They read aggression into gestures of friendship because their training told them to expect danger. They created the very hostility they feared through their defensive responses to normal human behavior. The council chamber fell silent as the implications settled. Their cadets hadn't failed because Earth was hostile. They'd failed because they couldn't recognize friendliness when they saw it. They'd been trained to see monsters in the mirror of human friendship. The real threat wasn't the smile. It was the fear behind their interpretation of it. Zara didn't blame the cadets for their failures. She stood there in that council chamber and made that perfectly clear. Her focus wasn't on individual mistakes, but on the system that programmed those mistakes into them. She identified the root problem as institutional blindness, a failure to see what was actually there instead of what they expected to find. The Academy had developed such precise ways of measuring danger that they forgot to measure understanding. The Academy trained for combat survival, not cultural interpretation. Their curriculum covered atmospheric toxins and predator evasion, but offered nothing about reading social cues or understanding local customs. Cadets learned to identify chemical weapons but couldn't recognize a friendly gesture. They could operate advanced scanning equipment but couldn't interpret a smiling face. Their education prepared them for conflict but not for connection. They'd equipped cadets with weapons when they needed translation guides. Every team carried plasma rifles and environmental seals, but had no access to basic phrase books or cultural manuals. Their gear could detect microscopic pathogens, but couldn't explain why humans gathered in public squares or how they greeted strangers. The equipment solved physical survival problems while creating social ones. Every mission failed because they approached Earth as a battlefield rather than a community. They treated neighborhoods as hostile territory and homes as potential strongholds. They scanned for threats when they should have been looking for patterns of normal life. Their tactical training taught them to see danger in everyday activities and hostility in ordinary interactions. Zara called it going in blind, having technology but no context. They could analyze a dog's teeth down to the molecular level, but couldn't read its wagging tail. They could measure rainwater composition with precision, but didn't know people danced in it. Their sensors gave them data without meaning, information without understanding, numbers without stories. This wasn't about weakness or cowardice. The cadets were brave, skilled, and dedicated. Their failure came from wrong preparation, not personal failing. They'd been taught to fight an enemy that didn't exist while missing the reality that did exist. Their training made them alert to imaginary dangers while blinding them to actual opportunities. The council members listened quietly as Zara explained this blindness. She described how their fear created the very isolation that made Earth seem hostile. Their defensive postures made humans cautious around them. Their weapon displays made humans avoid them. Their constant scanning made humans nervous. They became the threat they were trying to avoid. Zara's point about going blind meant having all the tools except the ones that mattered. They could see chemical compositions but not cultural meanings. They could detect sound frequencies but not emotional tones. They could analyze facial muscle movements but not read expressions. Their technology gave them perfect vision for everything except what actually determined survival on Earth. The real blindness was assuming that what worked on truly hostile worlds would work on Earth. They applied combat protocols to a planet that required communication skills. They used emergency procedures for normal situations. They treated friendly overtures as attack patterns. Their training prepared them for the wrong kind of challenge entirely. I watched the council members realizing they'd been sending cadets into situations they couldn't possibly understand. Not because the cadets weren't smart or capable, but because they'd been given the wrong tools and the wrong mindset. They'd been prepared for war when what they needed was preparation for welcome. The blindness wasn't in their eyes, but in their instruction manuals. Zara didn't just criticize their methods, she offered a complete alternative approach. She proposed replacing combat survival training with cultural literacy education. Her solution focused on teaching cadets to read social signals instead of environmental threats. She wanted to train them in interpretation rather than combat readiness. Her curriculum would include distinguishing between play fighting and real aggression. Cadets would learn to recognize the difference between a dog's playful bark and an actual threat display. They would study human body language, understanding that a smile usually means friendliness, not dental aggression. The training would cover interpreting gestures like waving or nodding that the previous teams had misread. The program included understanding human humor patterns and recognizing hospitality signals. Cadets would learn why humans offer food to guests and how to respond appropriately. They would study social hierarchies in human communities and communication styles across different Earth cultures. The focus would shift from weapon handling to social navigation. The Academy leadership initially rejected this as unscientific soft skills. Commander Vex called it subjective nonsense compared to their precise environmental metrics. Council members questioned how you could measure cultural understanding in their standard evaluation systems. They argued combat readiness provided concrete survival advantages, while social skills seemed vague and unquantifiable. Zara argued that first contact requires social intelligence above all else. She pointed out that their current approach created hostility where none existed. Her methods wouldn't replace technical skills but would provide the context to use them properly. She emphasized that misunderstanding social cues had proven more dangerous than any environmental factor. She offered to personally lead a training mission to prove her methods. She proposed taking a small team to Earth under her guidance using the cultural literacy approach. The mission would follow all standard protocols except the preparation methodology. They would use the same equipment but with different training beforehand. 3 cadets surprisingly volunteered despite the Death World designation. They'd all lost colleagues to previous failed Earth missions. Each had reasons to doubt the traditional approach after reviewing the mission failures. They recognized that combat readiness hadn't saved their friends, so they were willing to try something different. The volunteers came from species that had particularly struggled with Earth missions. They represented the cadets who had failed most spectacularly under the old system. Their willingness to try Zara's approach showed how much the existing method had broken their confidence. They were choosing understanding over fighting as their survival strategy. Zara's radical solution wasn't about adding new technology or better weapons. It was about changing the fundamental perspective cadets brought to Earth missions. Instead of approaching as warriors entering hostile territory, they would come as students entering a classroom. The planet itself would become their teacher rather than their enemy. The Council approved the experimental mission with strict monitoring protocols. They maintained the Death World classification, but allowed this one exception. The success of 47 teams had proven Earth was deadly under their approach. Now they would see if Zara's method could produce different results. The entire Academy watched as preparation began for this unprecedented approach to first contact. Kale 9999 volunteered first. A Zirian whose entire species communicates through electromagnetic pulses rather than sound. His people had lost 3 teams to Earth missions, each failure more baffling than the last. The reports showed cadets experiencing complete communication breakdowns, unable to interpret or respond to human interactions. Kale himself had watched his training partner return from an Earth mission psychologically shattered, unable to articulate what went wrong, beyond describing constant misinterpretation. Jix Prime joined next. An Aquarian whose gills required special atmospheric processing equipment. His species had particularly struggled with Earth's environment, their reports filled with panic responses to what humans considered normal weather conditions. Jix had studied the mission log showing Aquarian cadets deploying maximum environmental seals during light rain, treating ordinary humidity as a biological threat. He knew 6 Aquarians who never returned from Earth deployments, their last transmissions describing atmospheric conditions the Academy classified as lethal. Nara completed the team. A Velconian whose 6 arms made human gestures confusing and overwhelming. Her people's missions had failed spectacularly, with cadets interpreting friendly waves as complex threat displays. Nara had reviewed footage of Velconian teams retreating from human settlements because locals used hand signals they couldn't interpret. She'd lost her sister to an Earth mission that ended, with the Cadet triggering defensive protocols against what turned out to be a welcoming committee. Each represented species that had suffered particularly badly under the traditional approach. They'd all watched colleagues depart for Earth with perfect mission records only to return broken, or not return at all. Their volunteer applications cited specific failures they believed resulted from cultural misunderstanding rather than environmental danger. They recognized that traditional methods were getting cadets killed. The combat readiness approach had produced 47 failures without a single success. The weapons and environmental gear hadn't prevented psychological breakdowns or social isolation. They saw that surviving Earth required understanding, not fighting. They chose cultural literacy over combat readiness as their survival strategy. This represented a fundamental shift in perspective. Instead of preparing for battle, they prepared for learning. Their training focused on interpretation rather than confrontation, observation rather than defense. This was the first team to approach Earth as students rather than warriors. Their mission profile showed no offensive capabilities beyond standard defensive measures. Their primary equipment included translation aids, cultural databases, and communication devices rather than enhanced weaponry. Their orders emphasized observation and interaction over threat assessment. Their diversity became their strength rather than a complication. Kale's electromagnetic sensing could detect emotional states invisible to standard sensors. Jix's environmental adaptation needs made him attentive to how humans modified their surroundings for comfort. Nara's multiple limbs offered unique insights into nonverbal communication complexity. Where previous teams saw disabilities, Zara saw specialized perspectives. They volunteered because they'd seen the alternative fail. They knew more weapons wouldn't solve misinterpretation. Better environmental seals wouldn't prevent social isolation. They believed understanding human culture offered better survival odds than combat training. Their shared losses created willingness to try something radically different from what had already failed their people. The Academy watched with mixed reactions. Some called them fools volunteering for suicide. Others saw courage in attempting a new approach. The Council maintained the Death World classification, but allowed the experiment to proceed. The team's diversity made them perfect test subjects for whether cultural literacy could overcome biological differences where combat readiness had failed. The team landed near Zara's hometown under strict observation protocols, their shuttle touching down in a field just beyond the residential area. Surveillance drones hovered invisibly overhead, monitoring every frequency from biometrics to atmospheric conditions. Mission Control expected military response or government welcome teams. Instead, their first contact came from an entirely unexpected direction. Mrs. Gable noticed them from her garden and approached carrying a basket of fresh vegetables. She wore gardening gloves and a wide-brimmed hat, her expression more curious than concerned. The cadets immediately assumed defensive positions, scanning her for weapons. Their sensors detected gardening tools, soil samples, and ripe tomatoes, nothing resembling military equipment. But their training protocols still categorized her as an unknown approaching entity. She simply offered them tomatoes from her basket and asked about their unusual costumes. Her tone carried friendly curiosity without aggression. The cadets' translation systems worked perfectly, converting her words while their combat training screamed danger. Their heart rates elevated, stress indicators spiked, and defensive postures remained engaged despite the peaceful interaction. When Zara explained they were exchange students, Mrs. Gable's face lit up with recognition. She immediately invited them for dinner, gesturing toward her nearby house. The cadets' sensors showed no threats in the vicinity. Their environmental readings indicated normal atmospheric conditions. Their weapons detection systems found nothing. Yet their training insisted this was a potential ambush situation. They had to choose between protocol and the offered hospitality. Kale's electromagnetic senses detected no hostile intent from Mrs. Gable. Jix's environmental monitors showed safe conditions. Nara's multiple arms remained poised between defensive positions and potential greeting gestures. Zara watched them silently, allowing them to make their own decision. This first test revealed everything wrong with their preparation. Their systems could analyze tomato composition, but couldn't interpret the social meaning of food offering. They could scan Mrs. Gable's biology, but couldn't read her welcoming expression. They had technology to detect hidden weapons but no training to recognize neighborly invitation. The cadets hesitated, their systems conflicting with their new training. Protocol demanded defensive withdrawal. Cultural literacy suggested accepting the invitation. Their internal struggle showed in their body language. Tensed muscles relaxing slightly, defensive stances shifting uncertainly. They watched Zara accept a tomato from Mrs. Gable and take a bite, demonstrating the food's safety. Mrs. Gable waited patiently, her basket still extended. She made no aggressive moves, maintained comfortable distance, and kept her expression open and friendly. Her simple presence became the ultimate test of whether they could override combat training with cultural understanding. The surveillance drones recorded every physiological response, every hesitant movement, every conflicted decision point. Finally, Kale stepped forward first, his electromagnetic fields adjusting to mimic human calming signals. He carefully accepted a tomato, his sensors confirming it was exactly what it appeared to be: fresh produce. Jix followed, his environmental systems noting the complete absence of threats in the immediate area. Nera finally relaxed her defensive posture, all 6 arms moving into more natural positions. Mrs. Gable smiled, completely unaware she'd just become the first human to pass the Academy's revised first contact protocol. Her simple neighborly gesture had accomplished what 47 military-trained teams had failed to achieve: peaceful initial contact with Earth residents. The cadets had chosen cultural literacy over combat readiness, and the world hadn't ended. In fact, it had offered them dinner. Mrs. Voss welcomed the team into her home with a baked casserole and fresh bread straight from the oven. The dish steamed on the table, filling the room with aromas of herbs and baked grains. The cadets immediately scanned the food for toxins and biological contaminants, their training overriding the welcoming atmosphere. Their readings came back showing safe, nutritious composition, even indicating what their databases classified as delicious flavor profiles. Yet they hesitated, their mission protocols warning against accepting unknown substances from unvetted sources. Zara served herself first. Taking a generous portion of the casserole and breaking off a piece of bread, she showed them how humans share food as a trust-building exercise, eating without hesitation while maintaining eye contact with the team. Her actions demonstrated that the offering contained no hidden threats, that acceptance represented goodwill rather than vulnerability. The cadets watched her closely, their sensors confirming her vital signs remained stable after consumption. The act of eating together became their first real cultural lesson. Mrs. Voss asked about their homes, their families, their travels while passing the breadbasket. Her questions weren't interrogations. They were conversation starters, attempts to build connection through shared stories. She listened carefully to their translated responses, nodding with genuine interest when they described their homeworlds. Her attention never felt assessing, only welcoming. The cadets slowly realized this wasn't an assessment. It was welcome. Their heart rates gradually decreased as the meal progressed. Their defensive postures relaxed into seated positions that mirrored their hosts. They began accepting second helpings without preliminary scans, their trust growing with each passed dish. The casserole revolution wasn't about the food itself, but about what sharing it represented. Mrs. Voss's simple meal changed their perception of Earth fundamentally. Where they'd expected threat assessment, they found hospitality. Instead of interrogation, they experienced conversation. The Death World narrative began crumbling with every bite of casserole, every slice of bread, every moment of shared laughter around the table. Their sensors had measured the food's safety, but the real measurement was happening in their changing attitudes. The Academy had trained them to see danger in every unknown. Mrs. Voss taught them to see opportunity in shared experience. Her casserole dinner demonstrated that human safety systems operated through social bonds, rather than individual protection. The meal itself became a language they were learning to understand, one that spoke of trust, community, and welcome rather than defense, isolation, and suspicion. I watched the cadets transform during that meal. Their rigid training protocols slowly gave way to genuine curiosity. They began asking questions about the food's preparation, about local customs, about human family structures. Mrs. Voss answered everything patiently, treating their cultural ignorance as natural rather than defective. Her acceptance of their learning process made them more willing to learn. The casserole revolution proved that cultural literacy required participation, not just observation. The cadets had to taste the food to understand its significance. They had to join the conversation to feel its connective power. Their scanners could analyze nutritional content, but only shared experience could reveal cultural meaning. Mrs. Voss's kitchen became their most effective classroom, her simple meal their most valuable training exercise. By the end of dinner, the cadets weren't just eating, they were participating. They passed dishes to each other, tried unfamiliar vegetables, even attempted human eating customs. Their transformation from defensive visitors to engaged guests demonstrated the power of shared meals to bridge cultural divides. The Death World classification hadn't accounted for human hospitality, and now 3 cadets were experiencing its revolutionary power firsthand. Zara introduced the team to Murphy, the so-called psychological predator from the Academy reports. I watched the cadets immediately assume defensive positions, their training overriding what their eyes showed them. They maintained careful distances and ready stances, bodies tensed for an attack that never came. Their sensors detected the same biological markers that had triggered previous cadet breakdowns: the bared teeth, the vocalizations, the approaching movement pattern. Everything their training classified as threat indicators was present, yet the reality was completely different. Zara demonstrated how to read canine body language without relying on threat assessment protocols. She showed them tail position variations. High and wagging meant excitement, low and tucked meant fear, still and raised meant alertness. She explained ear orientation differences and how vocal tones change meaning based on context. A high-pitched bark could mean play Yao Qing while a low growl might be territorial. The same physical signals their equipment measured could mean opposite things depending on situation. She physically demonstrated the difference between play bows and threat postures. Murphy would drop his front legs with his rear in the air, tail wagging wildly, a play invitation. Then Zara showed how an actual threat posture involved stiff legs, raised hackles, and fixed staring. The cadets watched Murphy alternate between these positions on command, seeing the clear physical differences their training had never distinguished. Murphy demonstrated his friendliness by bringing them his favorite toys: a frayed tennis ball, a squeaky rubber bone, a well-chewed rope. He dropped them at the cadets' feet and looked up expectantly. His tail wagged in wide arcs that stirred the air around him. His eyes showed anticipation rather than aggression. His whole body wiggled with the effort of containing his excitement about potential play. Cale discovered he could sense Murphy's emotional state through electromagnetic fields. The dog's friendly excitement created distinct EM patterns different from aggression or fear. Where Cale had felt disabled without translation technology, he found he could read Murphy's intentions directly through these energy signatures. He began anticipating when Murphy would approach based on EM field changes before any physical movement occurred. Jix found Murphy responded positively to his aquatic species' calm energy. His natural biological rhythms, evolved for underwater environments, created a soothing effect on the dog. Murphy would settle near Jix, resting his head on the aquarian's lap without any defensive reactions. Jix realized his physiological differences that made Earth's atmosphere challenging actually provided unexpected advantages in animal communication. Nara's multiple arms turned out to be excellent for simultaneous ear scratches. Murphy particularly enjoyed having both ears rubbed while someone scratched his back or belly. Her Velconian physiology, which had caused confusion with human gestures, became an asset in canine interaction. She could provide the kind of multi-point attention that made Murphy roll over in blissful appreciation. They transformed from fearing predators to understanding companions. Their defensive postures relaxed into casual kneeling positions. Their scanning equipment remained active, but now recorded positive biological responses rather than threat readings. They learned that tail wagging wasn't a single signal, but a complex language of speed, height, and direction that communicated specific emotional states. The same motion they'd been trained to see as danger could mean happiness, excitement, or welcome depending on context. Their education shifted from combat preparation to communication understanding, with Murphy as their patient teacher. The neighborhood children noticed the unusual visitors and approached without hesitation, calling them the aliens with funny voices. Their curiosity overcame any caution their parents might have felt. drawn by the unfamiliar sounds and appearances. The cadets immediately treated them as potential threats or reconnaissance units, their training classifying unexpected approaches as hostile engagements. Their bodies tensed, their sensors activated, and their defensive protocols prepared for possible attack scenarios despite the obvious lack of weapons or aggressive postures. The children simply wanted to show them their treehouse and play games. They pointed toward a sturdy oak tree with a wooden structure nestled in its branches, their expressions open and inviting. They asked if the aliens wanted to see their secret hideout and join their games. This became the ultimate test of their cultural retraining, forcing them to choose between combat readiness and the new cultural literacy approach Zara had taught them. The kids taught them hopscotch first, drawing patterns on the pavement with chalk and demonstrating the jumping sequence. They showed them tag, explaining the rules of pursuit and safe zones. They organized hide and seek, counting aloud while the cadets learned concealment as play rather than tactical positioning. Each game followed specific social rules that the children explained through action rather than lecture. Through play, the cadets learned human social structures and communication patterns. They observed how children negotiated rules, resolved disputes, and included newcomers. They saw how physical contact during games differed from aggressive encounters, how laughter marked enjoyment rather than threat, how competition existed within cooperative frameworks. The games provided living examples of human interaction that their training manuals had never covered. They discovered children were excellent teachers of cultural norms precisely because they hadn't fully learned adult caution yet. The kids' honesty and curiosity created a safe learning environment where mistakes carried no serious consequences. When a cadet misunderstood a game rule, the children simply corrected them and continued playing. Their directness lacked the subtle social pressures that made adult interactions more complicated. This unstructured interaction taught more than any formal training could have provided. The cadets learned through experience rather than instruction, through participation rather than observation. They felt the social rhythms of human play rather than analyzing them from a distance. The children's natural teaching style, demonstrating, correcting, encouraging, proved incredibly effective for cultural learning. The transformation in the cadets' understanding came gradually through these interactions. Their defensive postures relaxed into playful stances. Their scanning equipment remained active but now recorded social data rather than threat assessments. They began anticipating game patterns and understanding nonverbal cues from their young teachers. The Death World narrative continued crumbling with every game played, every rule learned, every shared laugh. The children's questions about alien homeworlds and customs revealed their natural curiosity about differences rather than fear of them. They asked about the cadets' unusual physical features without judgment, treating them as interesting variations rather than defects. This open acceptance helped the cadets see human diversity acceptance in action, understanding that difference didn't necessarily mean danger. By the end of the afternoon, the cadets weren't just playing, they were understanding. They could read the children's excitement in their body language, interpret their disputes through social context, and participate in their games as equals rather than observers. The neighborhood kids had done what 47 military-trained teams couldn't achieve. They'd made Earth feel like home rather than a battlefield. Their simple games had taught the complex social literacy that combat training had missed entirely. I watched Kale 999 discover something remarkable about human perception. The Zerion communicated through electromagnetic pulses rather than sound, a method completely outside human auditory range. His species used frequencies and modulations that translated poorly through standard interpretation technology. Initially, this seemed like a severe limitation for Earth interaction. Humans couldn't hear his speech, but they responded to his emotional frequency with surprising accuracy. He discovered humans subconsciously sense emotional states beyond verbal communication. Their brains picked up on the emotional content of his EM fields even when they couldn't consciously perceive the pulses themselves. This subconscious sensitivity allowed them to react to his intentions without understanding the mechanism. Where previous teams had struggled with translation devices, Kale found humans naturally tuned into his emotional broadcasts. His EM fields could calm anxious dogs or make children laugh unconsciously. I saw him approach a nervous terrier that had been barking at delivery drones. Without making a sound, Kale modulated his pulses to project calm reassurance. The dog settled within moments, tilting its head as if listening to something pleasant. Children playing nearby would suddenly include him in their games. Drawn by the friendly frequencies he emitted without understanding why they felt comfortable around him. Where he'd felt disabled without translation technology, he found new ability. His electromagnetic communication became an asset rather than a handicap. He learned to modulate his pulses to convey friendship, curiosity, appreciation with precise emotional clarity. The subtle variations in frequency and intensity communicated more honestly than words sometimes could. His messages carried pure emotional content without linguistic filters or translation errors. Shopkeepers would suddenly offer him discounts without knowing why. They'd feel an unexplained positive impression and adjust prices accordingly. Market vendors would give him extra fruit samples, describing him as having good energy, though they couldn't explain the feeling. His EM fields created subtle influences that improved his interactions throughout the human community. These small economic advantages demonstrated the practical value of nonverbal emotional communication. Children would include him in games, despite the communication barrier. They couldn't understand his language or unusual appearance, but they felt his playful intentions. Their innate sensitivity to emotional signals overrode their confusion about his physical differences. They treated him as just another playmate, responding to the happiness he projected rather than the words he couldn't speak. Their acceptance proved emotional understanding transcended species boundaries. He became the team's emotional translator, reading what others couldn't perceive. While Zara handled verbal communication, Kale monitored the emotional undercurrents of their interactions. He could sense when humans felt uncomfortable before they showed physical signs. He detected subtle shifts in mood that warning systems missed. His unique perception provided early warnings about misunderstandings that could escalate if, unaddressed. The Academy had classified his communication method as a disability requiring technological compensation. Earth revealed it as a unique advantage for social navigation. His inability to speak human languages forced him to develop more nuanced nonverbal communication skills. What seemed like limitation became specialized perception. His electromagnetic sensitivity allowed him to read social situations with a clarity that verbal communication sometimes obscured. I watched him sit with elderly humans in the town square, neither understanding the other's language, yet communicating perfectly through shared emotional space. They would nod and smile while he pulsed gentle curiosity and respect. Their life experiences resonated with his ancient Zerion frequencies in ways words couldn't capture. They felt understood without knowing how, appreciated without hearing why. His silence spoke louder than any translation device could have managed. Jix Prime required special atmospheric processing due to his aquatic biology, his gills needing specific humidity levels that Earth's air didn't naturally provide. I watched him initially see Earth's environment as hostile terrain requiring constant protection, his Academy-issued atmospheric processor humming loudly on his back. The bulky equipment marked him as different everywhere he went, its visible technology drawing stares and creating barriers to normal interaction. He moved through human spaces like a soldier in contested territory, always aware of his life support systems. But he discovered human technology had already solved his adaptation needs through simple, integrated solutions. Zara showed him residential humidifiers that maintained perfect moisture levels in homes, climate control systems that created customized environments room by room. These human inventions worked perfectly for his biological requirements, without the obvious machinery of his Academy gear. They blended into normal living spaces rather than standing out as survival equipment. Where the Academy provided bulky, obvious environmental suits, humans offered discrete solutions woven into daily life. Jix learned that stores sold personal humidifiers small enough to carry in a pocket, that offices maintained climate zones for employee comfort, that even vehicles had environmental controls. Human innovation focused on comfort rather than survival, on integration rather than separation. Their technology solved the same problems his Academy gear addressed, but through entirely different philosophy. This reflected their entire approach to environmental challenges across their civilization. Humans didn't combat their world. They adapted it for comfortable coexistence. They modified environments to suit diverse needs rather than requiring individuals to armor themselves against hostility. Their buildings had climate control, their cities managed air quality, their homes created customized atmospheres. The solutions were everywhere once Jix learned to recognize them. Jix realized Earth wasn't hostile. It was adaptable to diverse needs through simple, clever technology. He replaced his noisy Academy processor with a small human-made humidifier that fit in his jacket pocket. The change transformed his experience completely. People stopped staring at his equipment. He could move through crowds without creating space around himself. He could sit in cafes, visit shops, attend gatherings without his life support systems dominating interactions. His transformation demonstrated the difference between surviving and living comfortably. The Academy's approach kept cadets alive but isolated them from the very environments they needed to understand. Human technology allowed integration while still meeting biological needs. Jix found he could participate fully in human society once he shed the visible markers of being different. The Death World narrative hadn't accounted for human adaptability and their talent for environmental modification. I watched Jix sitting in Mrs. Voss's kitchen, his small humidifier resting unnoticed on the counter, maintaining perfect atmospheric conditions while he learned to bake bread. His gills functioned normally, his biology supported, but he was just another participant in the kitchen rather than a patient requiring life support. The human solution worked so well it became invisible, allowing him to focus on cultural learning rather than survival. This integration represented everything the Academy's approach had missed. That true adaptation meant blending in, not standing out. Nera's 6 arms made human gestures confusing and overwhelming at first. Human waving, pointing, even something as simple as handshaking seemed chaotic when attempted with multiple limbs. The Academy training had prepared her for standardized diplomatic gestures that assumed 2-arm physiology. Earth's informal communication styles created constant uncertainty about which arms to use when. She often found herself mirroring human movements with all 6 limbs simultaneously, creating unintended comic effects that confused everyone involved. But she discovered her extra arms became advantages in human social rituals through careful observation. She watched how humans multitasked during greetings, shaking hands while holding packages or gesturing toward seats. Her capacity for handling multiple actions simultaneously actually made humans more comfortable once they understood her intentions. She could shake hands with one set of arms while offering gifts with another, or guide someone while maintaining welcoming gestures. This multitasking ability smoothed social interactions rather than complicating them. Where she'd seen disability in her unusual physiology, humans saw enhanced communication ability. Their culture valued expressive movement and generous physical expression in social settings. Her additional limbs allowed her to communicate warmth and attention through multiple channels simultaneously. She could maintain eye contact while gesturing welcome, offer physical assistance while speaking, create complex patterns of movement that humans found fascinating rather than threatening. Her differences became assets in building connection rather than barriers to understanding. She learned that human culture valued expressive movement, not minimal efficiency. Their communication involved constant physical expression, beyond mere information transfer. A hand on the shoulder during conversation, gestures reinforcing speech, physical guidance rather than verbal direction. All these required the kind of multi-limb coordination that came naturally to her. Human social rituals rewarded generous physical presence rather than economical movement. Her unique biology became her greatest asset in building connections. Children particularly responded to her ability to play multiple roles simultaneously. She could be tying shoes, catching balls, and offering high fives all at once. Adults appreciated her capacity for helping with multiple tasks during social gatherings, where other cadets struggled with the physical aspects of human interaction. Nera found her physiology perfectly suited to their expressive communication style. This personal transformation revolutionized how the Academy approached species with non-standard physiology. Her success demonstrated that physical differences could be communication advantages rather than limitations. The Academy had previously tried to minimize non-standard physical traits through adaptation technology or behavior modification. Nera's experience showed they should instead explore how unique biologies might offer specialized social advantages. I watched her at the town barbecue, moving through the crowd with natural grace. 2 arms carried plates of food, 2 guided elderly attendees to seats, 2 gestured in conversation with a group of children. Her movements flowed naturally where they'd once seemed awkward. Humans responded to her enhanced capacity for connection, often gathering around her as if drawn by her ability to engage multiple people simultaneously. She'd turned her greatest perceived disadvantage into her most valuable social tool. The children particularly loved her extra limbs, asking her to demonstrate juggling or complex gestures they couldn't manage with only 2 arms. Their acceptance and curiosity helped her see her physiology as special rather than defective. Their innocent questions about how she used all her arms taught her that difference could be celebrated rather than concealed. Their fascination helped her understand that human culture valued diversity of expression. Her experience proved that communication barriers often came from limited perspectives rather than actual incompatibility. The Academy had seen her 6 arms as a problem to solve. Humans saw them as an interesting variation to understand. This shift in perspective, from problem-solving to understanding, became the foundation of Zara's cultural literacy approach. Nara's arms weren't the issue, how people viewed them was. The team attended a community barbecue in the town square, their sensors immediately detecting multiple threat indicators that should have triggered defensive protocols. Open flames from multiple grills, unknown foods being prepared and shared, densely packed crowds moving unpredictably. Every Death World metric flashed warnings across their displays. Their training dictated immediate withdrawal to secure perimeter positions. Instead, they stood still and observed how humans actually managed these supposedly dangerous elements. They witnessed humans operating through social cooperation rather than individual protection. Children moved near the grills but under watchful adult supervision, learning fire safety through guided experience rather than exclusion. Neighbors shared food directly from cooking surfaces without preliminary scanning or testing, trusting the preparer's competence and intentions. Everyone watched out for each other's safety in subtle, continuous ways, stepping aside to make space, warning about hot surfaces, guiding children away from potential hazards without alarm. This wasn't a survival situation. It was a community system operating smoothly through established social patterns. The cadets saw that human safety emerged from relationships and mutual awareness, rather than defensive equipment or combat readiness. People knew each other, trusted each other's judgment, and maintained collective awareness of the environment. Their safety system functioned through social bonds that their scanners couldn't detect but their eyes could now see. They realized the real danger wasn't environmental elements but missing social context. The open flames became manageable through shared responsibility. The unknown foods became safe through established trust networks. The crowded space became navigable through mutual consideration. What their training classified as threats were actually normal community activities, when understood within their proper social framework. Earth's safety system was invisible to scanners, but obvious to participants. The cadets' equipment could detect heat sources and crowd density, but couldn't measure the trust between neighbors or the effectiveness of informal supervision. Their technology missed the subtle cues and patterns that actually ensured safety. The eye contact between adults watching children, the nodding agreements about cooking times, the unspoken coordination of movement through crowded spaces. This was the ultimate proof of Zara's cultural literacy approach. The Death World classification had focused on Wu-Li measurements while ignoring social reality. The Academy had trained cadets to survive hostile environments, but not to understand cooperative ones. Their failure came from preparing for combat where they should have prepared for community participation. The cadets watched as the town square functioned, perfectly despite containing every element. Their training considered dangerous. The flames cooked food without accidents. The unfamiliar dishes nourished without illness. The crowd moved harmoniously without conflict. The reality contradicted their threat assessments completely once they understood the social context. I saw them lowering their defensive postures as understanding dawned. Their scanners still showed the same environmental readings, but their eyes now saw the social systems managing those readings. They began recognizing the patterns of cooperation that made the barbecue safe. The way people naturally created fire lanes, how experienced cooks monitored novice helpers, how the crowd self-regulated its density through polite interaction. The town square revelation wasn't about discovering new technology or superior equipment. It was about recognizing that human safety came from invisible social structures rather than visible protective gear. The cadets had been looking for individual survival solutions when the actual solution was collective cooperation. Their training had prepared them for the wrong kind of challenge entirely. Zara's approach worked because it taught them to see what was actually there, rather than what their fear expected to find. The cultural literacy training allowed them to recognize safety systems their scanners couldn't detect. They learned that sometimes the most dangerous thing isn't the environment. It's the failure to understand how people navigate that environment together. The barbecue proved that Earth wasn't a death world, but a lesson in social survival they'd nearly missed entirely. The team returned with 4 completely revised assessment reports, each documenting what they'd actually found instead of what they'd been trained to see. These weren't mission failure analyses, but successful contact records. I watched Commander Vex receive them, his usual grim expression shifting to something closer to confusion as he processed the content. The Death World classification suddenly looked less like scientific fact and more like institutional blindness, made official. Kale's report focused on emotional communication and subconscious connection. His documentation showed how humans sense intention beyond verbal language, responding to emotional frequencies their conscious minds can't perceive. He included data on how his electromagnetic pulses influenced human behavior without translation technology. His findings proved that communication involved more than words. It required emotional alignment that their previous teams had completely missed. Jix's analysis highlighted human adaptability and environmental integration. His report detailed how human technology solved biological needs through discrete, integrated systems rather than obvious survival gear. He documented residential climate control, personal humidifiers, and vehicle environmental systems that supported his aquatic biology better than academy equipment. His conclusion showed that humans modify environments for comfort rather than requiring individuals to combat hostile conditions. Nara's documentation revealed gesture-based communication systems that leveraged her unique physiology. Her report explained how multiple limbs became advantages in human social rituals rather than disabilities. She included video evidence of her using 6 arms simultaneously for complex social interactions that 2-armed species couldn't manage. Her findings demonstrated that physical differences could enhance communication rather than hinder it when properly understood. Together, they proved Earth wasn't a death world, but a context world. The environment remained exactly the same. Same atmosphere, same creatures, same weather patterns. What changed was their understanding of how these elements functioned within human culture. Their report showed that danger emerged from misinterpretation rather than inherent hostility. The Academy's failure rate wasn't about environmental danger, but cultural misunderstanding. Commander Vex had to reconfigure their entire training program based on these findings. I watched him review the reports multiple times, checking the data against previous mission failures. The evidence was undeniable. Their approach had been wrong from the beginning. They'd prepared cadets for combat when they should have prepared them for comprehension. The Death World classification had created its own reality through fearful expectations. They replaced combat survival with cultural literacy as core curriculum. The new training focused on interpreting social cues rather than environmental threats. Cadets learned to distinguish play from aggression, welcome from warning, ordinary weather from actual danger. The changes affected everything from equipment selection to mission protocols. Weapons training decreased while communication practice increased. Earth missions became among their most successful exchange programs almost immediately. The next cadet teams approached Earth as students rather than warriors. They carried translation guides instead of enhanced weaponry. They sought understanding rather than defense. The mission success rate reversed completely, from 0 survivors to consistent positive outcomes. The Death World designation was quietly retired from official use. Zara's cultural literacy approach worked because it addressed the actual problem rather than the imagined one. The cadets hadn't needed better weapons, they'd needed better interpretation skills. They required context for what they were seeing, not more advanced scanning of things they already misunderstood. Her method taught them to read the world through human eyes rather than combat sensors. The revolution wasn't technological, but perceptual. Same planet, different understanding. Same humans, different interpretation. Same environmental readings, different meaning. Zara proved that sometimes survival means learning rather than fighting, understanding rather than conquering, adapting rather than armoring. Her approach saved more cadets than any weapons upgrade ever could have. I watched Earth change from a death world into a teacher. The danger was never in the rain or the dogs or the smiling faces. It was in the fear we brought with us. Zara showed us that survival means understanding, not conquering. Maybe we all need to check our assumptions about the unfamiliar. Sometimes the most hostile thing isn't the environment. It's what we believe about it before we even arrive. The galaxy could use more of what humans do best, making friends with things that should probably eat us. That's the real survival skill. They declared Earth a death world where no cadet survives. I've seen the reports, 47 missions, 0 intact returns. Then she stood up, a human exchange student named Zara Voss, and asked the one question that shattered everything. Then how exactly am I standing here? What happened next forced the entire Galactic Academy to rethink everything they knew about survival. Fear and First CI watched Commander Vex 9 stand before the Galactic Council. His posture rigid, his face all grim angles under the chamber lights. His report hovered in the air between them. 47 failed missions, 0 survivors returning from Earth. Not even partial remains for some of them. Just silence after the initial landing confirmation. The declaration that followed felt absolute, like a blade coming down. Earth would be classified as a Level 7 death world. No appeal, no further discussion. Every sensor reading backed him up. Atmospheric scans showed toxin levels that should have melted organic tissue within minutes. Thermal imaging detected constant movement patterns consistent with large predator packs. Bio readings indicated pervasive psychological stressors, elevated heart rates, cortisol spikes, neural panic responses in every cadet team within hours of arrival. Their data painted a picture of a planet that didn't just resist visitors, it consumed them. They'd lost some of their best. Cadet teams with flawless records on hostile ice worlds and volcanic zones, specialists in extreme environment survival, all of them gone on what Vex called a meat grinder planet. The Academy's entire Earth program was minutes from permanent shutdown. Council members were already nodding, hands moving toward the ratification panel. That's when she stood. Just a flicker of movement at the back of the chamber. A human exchange student named Zara Voss, quiet until then. She raised her hand, not waiting for recognition. The entire galactic government turned to stare. Council members, military advisors, species representatives from 12 systems, all focused on one young woman in simple Earth clothing. Her voice cut through the silence, clear and steady. Then how exactly am I standing here? No one answered. The environmental seals on the chamber doors seemed suddenly unnecessary. The threat assessment holograms flickered. Commander Vex's hand paused over the termination order. All that data, all those lost cadets, and yet, there she was, breathing their air, standing on their floor, alive. I saw the doubt cross their faces for the first time. Not just doubt about her, doubt about everything they thought they knew. The Death World classification required unanimous consent. That unanimous consent now hung in the air, fragile as glass. Zara didn't move. She just waited, her question lingering like a crack in their certainty. The council chamber had never felt so quiet, or so exposed. Untact Zara Voss stood completely still amid the stunned silence. Her posture relaxed while council members shifted nervously in their seats. Her presence alone contradicted every Death World metric in their database. I watched the realization dawn on their faces. This wasn't a simulation or a malfunction. This was a living, breathing anomaly standing where no human should have been able to stand. Commander Vex's sensors had detected her human biology during her arrival processing weeks earlier. The log showed standard Earth DNA markers, standard oxygen-nitrogen respiration patterns, standard everything, yet she showed no radiation burns despite Earth's supposedly lethal atmospheric exposure levels. No psychological trauma markers despite constant predator threat readings. No environmental adaptation gear beyond the Academy-issued uniform she'd been given upon arrival. She wore no protective seals, carried no emergency filtration units, showed no signs of the constant defensive readiness their cadets maintained. Her simple question exposed a fundamental flaw in their assessment methodology. The council members began checking their instruments for malfunctions, tapping screens, running diagnostic protocols. I saw the head of the science division recalibrating his atmospheric scanner. aiming it at Zara while trying to appear casual. The readings came back normal. Perfectly normal. Panic began to ripple through the leadership tiers. Advisors whispered behind hands. Security teams adjusted their stances, and Commander Vex's grim expression finally cracked into something resembling confusion. Zara remained calm through it all, her hands at her sides watching the galactic leadership descend into disorder around her. She didn't need to say another word. Her breathing pattern stayed even. Her heart rate, according to the medical scanners now being discreetly aimed her way, remained at resting levels. She represented living proof that their entire framework was wrong, and the council chamber felt that truth settling over them like a weight. This wasn't about survival technology or combat readiness. The best equipment in the galaxy hadn't saved those 47 teams. The most rigorous training protocols hadn't prepared them for what they actually faced. Zara's calm presence suggested something far more fundamental that they'd completely missed. Something that didn't show up on toxin scanners or predator tracking systems. The council had been measuring everything except the one variable that actually mattered, and now they were staring at the evidence they'd overlooked. I watched the shift happen in real time. The Death World classification required complete environmental hostility. Zara's continued existence proved incomplete hostility. Her lack of protective gear suggested either incredible foolishness or deep understanding. Given that she'd survived where trained cadets had failed, the council was starting to realize which option was more likely. Their certainty was unraveling, and Zara hadn't even moved from her spot near the observation gallery. She just stood there waiting for them to understand what her presence meant. The silence stretched, heavy with unasked questions. The Academy's reports described Earth's precipitation as corrosive atmospheric bombardment. I remember reading the field notes from Cadet Team Gamma. They deployed full environmental seals during what Earth meteorologists classified as a light spring shower. Their logs documented acidic droplet impact and low visibility combat conditions. They treated a gentle rain like a chemical weapons event. One team spent 6 hours trapped in a drainage ditch during a standard thunderstorm. Their mission record showed constant alerts for pH imbalances and possible chemical contaminants. They'd sealed their helmets, activated air filtration, and waited for extraction from what they believed was active atmospheric warfare. Their sensors weren't malfunctioning. The water did have a slightly acidic pH. The visibility did decrease. Their measurements were accurate, but their interpretation was catastrophic. What they called atmospheric warfare, humans called a nice day for a walk. Zara explained this to the council with simple clarity. Children play in rain. Farmers welcome it for their crops. Cities function through it with people carrying umbrellas or wearing raincoats. She showed images of humans dancing in downpours, laughing as water soaked their hair and clothes. The council watched footage of children jumping in puddles where cadets had huddled in terror. The cadets' technology had accurately measured the environment, but completely misread its meaning. They detected the slight acidity of rainwater but missed that humans drink it without harm. They noted reduced visibility but didn't understand humans simply slow their travel during heavy rain. They recorded the electrical activity of thunderstorms, but failed to recognize many humans find beauty in lightning displays. They'd prepared for chemical warfare when they should have brought umbrellas. Their defensive protocols actually created the danger they feared. The environmental seals made them stand out in human populations. Their combat postures during rain events drew alarmed reactions from locals. Their technology protected them from imaginary threats while exposing them to real social risks. Zara's point wasn't that their sensors were wrong. Her point was that measurements without context are meaningless. The same water that nourishes crops can be measured as acidic. The same weather that creates beautiful rainbows can be logged as low visibility conditions. The same atmosphere that supports life can be misread as hostile based on numbers alone. The council members watched silently as Zara showed more images. A couple sharing an umbrella, a farmer smiling as rain waters his fields, a city street with people walking normally under awnings and through covered passages. None of them wore environmental seals. None of them treated precipitation as a threat. They simply adapted their behavior slightly to accommodate natural weather patterns. I saw the understanding dawn on Commander Vex's face. His cadets hadn't failed because Earth was too dangerous. They'd failed because they approached normal weather as a combat situation. Their training taught them to see threats where none existed. Their equipment amplified their fear rather than reducing it. They'd been given weapons when what they needed was basic cultural education about how humans interact with their own environment.